Hey everyone, I'm Leo, and last Monday, we at MonSec held the first weekly workshop of 2021, which also marked the first in-person workshop to be held in about 2 years. I and the others thought it was a great success, owing largely to our large turnout and rate of participation, so much so that we ended up having to switch venues to accommodate how large the turnout ended up being. Now, while we always try to record our workshops for the benefit of anyone that could not make it on the day or wishes to go over topics later, we realized too late on Monday that we had forgotten to press the record button. And as such, I'm making this short video to explain the topics that were introduced at this workshop. Now, on Monday, the topics that we covered were largely centered around SQL injection vulnerabilities, which is a form of injection vulnerability that you can use to edit, tamper with, or manipulate the results of SQL queries if a vulnerability exists. Now, the best way to explain this is that whenever you log into a website, or whenever you search for an item on a product page, or whenever you do something that a web server will have to look up in a database, you can generally assume that in the back end, it is doing something called an SQL query to try and find out the results of what you entered. Now, for example, when you log into this website here, now MonBank is a banking website that we at MonSec developed to demonstrate vulnerabilities. So when you enter an email and password here, so user@example.com and password, and you log in, now that's probably an incorrect login. But when you actually look it up, what it will do is it will go to this table in an SQL database, and it will perform a lookup similar to this. Now, let me just demonstrate what the table consists of. Now, the proper format to look up something in a database, or in a table rather, is to do select, and then whatever you're trying to look up. I'm just going to say return all information, so star. From now the table here is called users, and I just want to do that. I'm not going to do any conditional statements afterwards. So I just want all the information from each row in the database of users. And when you run that, I will get all of the information here on all the users. Now, this isn't the actual set of users on this website. This is just a different database I put together for demonstration purposes. And so we'll have to log into the other website through other means. However, if you wanted, you can put additional queries on the right. For example, you could say select all from users. Now, let's say we want to get rid of people that have a negative balance. Like, for example, we don't want Adam Collins and Scott Allen to turn up. So we just want everyone else except for them. So you can have conditional statements at the end that says select all from users where balance is greater than 0. Yes, and now we have all the cases where the balance is greater than 0. Or if you only want to see people with exactly $100 balance, you can say where balance equals 100. Now, when you're trying to log into a form, you can generally assume that the format of the string it's using will use something along the lines of select all from users where email equals, and then the email you're searching for, and then password equals whatever. And so here's a quick demo site here. Now, if anyone here knows anything about web design or knows CSS like off the back of their hand, please don't complain. I'm not a great web designer, and frankly, I don't care if it looks atrocious. So when you do something such as, let's say I want to log in as Andrew Johnston, you would put his email here and his password here, and it will generate a query of this format. Select all from users where email equals Andrew Johnston at example.com and password equals hunter2. And so if we copy this into our database and see what the results of this query will be, you can expect that there will only be one user with exactly the same email and the same password. And when the back end of the website queries that, it will then log you in because there is exactly one person and it seems to be valid. However, SQL injection vulnerabilities rise in when every single character in this is treated like as a control character rather than as a part of the string. Like, for example, let's say, what do you think would happen if we, at the end of our email, we just included a single quote character and a space? Now, once we do that, as you can see here, what we entered is just being just template injected into this form here. However, because the server doesn't know whether this quote is a part of the query or a part of the email, it's just being treated as a part of the entire query because there's no special encoding for this character. And so, as you can see here, this query seems to be malformed because there is just an empty quote at the end that was originally supposed to be closing the entire email. And so if we log in using this, if we just copy this query and see what happens, as you might expect, there will be an error. Now, one quick way to check whether the vulnerabilities exist that sometimes gives it away is if you try to log in as someone, but using, but keeping a quote at the end, and then when you log in, that you see that flash in the background there, that indicated that some kind of error occurred. In some other cases, you might see this error come up if you get a 500 or 502 server error. And now we need to think, how can we use this information to log into a website without knowing any of the details? Now, we can do this by using the fact that we can control the query exactly and inject whatever we want after this point. Now, the first thing we can do is by just using a single quote and then a comment, a double dash to signify a comment. Actually, so let me just copy the email address we knew comes up. And so if we use an email and then a single quote and a comment sign at the end, it will give us this query here. Select all from users where email equals Andrew Johnston at example.com. And then this quote here, this thing here that we've entered signifies a comment. Now, in a programming language, a comment is just a human readable string that you can put in for documentation purposes. And so the server will know to completely ignore this bit here. And so we don't have to worry about any kind of empty open control characters. And so here, if we run this query, maybe if we put this at the end to signify that the query is ended, if we run this, then in theory, we should get exactly one person back. Yes, and here we go. So now, if in theory, if we were to log in using this email address, we would be able to log in as Andrew Johnston. However, we are assuming in this case that we know the email address of any users. If we don't know any email addresses of any users, we have to be a bit more clever. And so the first thing we can do is we need to figure out a way to get this to work without knowing any logins. So if we were to just do, I don't know, just the letter A as a placeholder, it doesn't actually have to be anything. And then we can use now we're going to use something called a binary operator known as OR. Now, you might have seen this in any other programming language, but basically OR is an operator that takes in two inputs. And if any one of those inputs is true, then the resulting output will be true as well. For example, we'll do this and then OR 1 equals 1, and then comment, then a semicolon, a comment at the end. Yes, okay, now, so the way it goes is this query will go through every single row and we'll search and we'll check whether, and this where statement will run on every single row to make sure if it is true or not. Now, for every single row, the condition will hold that either the email equals A or 1 equals 1. Now, I know most of you watching this won't have any majors in pure mathematics or any relevant maths experience. That's not assuming. However, take my word for it that 1 will always equal 1. And so, in theory, if we were to use this login, if we were to use this query, this would turn out true, and we would get the login, and this would return true for every single field. And so let's try running this on the MonBank website. Now, in this case, we have to give some kind of placeholder password just so it lets us submit, but that's not really relevant. It doesn't really matter that much. But you'll find here in this case, it's not logging us in, but we're not getting the same error. This is because the SQL query is technically valid, but it's giving us unexpected results. The reason this is occurring is because in the back end, reasonably, the server is expecting that there is only going to be, when you try to log in, there'll only be one user with the right email and password. And so it is expecting exactly one row to be returned. And in this case, because it is returning every single row, it is not logging us in properly. And so we need a way to make only exactly one row log in. And so make exactly only one row return true and actually return. So the way we can do this is by adding an extra term at the end that says limits one. Now limits one, that's an extra statement that says I want you to run this entire query, and then I want you to only return the first row that's given. You can change this to limit 2, limit 3 to make it return as many as you want, but in this case, I only want one to return. So if I run this query now, it will only return Andrew Johnston. And so using our simulated login screen, we need to enter our email as any string, quote, or 1 = 1, limits 1. And the generated query gives us, in theory, if we log in here, if we run this query here, it will return Andrew Johnston and Hunter 2 with our password and should, in theory, log us in. So let me try doing that now. If I log into MonBank using a quote or 1 = 1, limit 1 and any password, then I can log in here and that should be fine. Now, if anyone here is keen on trying this out for themselves, the website bank.monsec.io is still open. Now, one thing I will mention is that this website does host a whole bunch of other vulnerabilities that you can try out yourself. In this video, I won't be going over the other vulnerabilities present in this website, but suffice to say, this is probably not the last you've seen of MonBank this semester. Although one hint I will give you is that it is possible to go onto this. It is possible through this website to transfer money from other users into your account, which is one of the vulnerabilities present. Now, the other form of vulnerability that we are going to focus on is looking at results from a search page, which is a very other typical implementation of SQL injections. Now, if you go into this Portswigger lab here, and now Portswigger is they make a lot of very good tools such as Burp Suite you may have seen before, but they also have this academy where you can have all these different labs. It would be very worthwhile if anyone wants to go through it and try it out. But for the time being, I'm just going to be looking at this one lab and try not to look at any of the hints here ahead of time. All right, so in this lab, we are given access to a product page. And here you can tell there are 4, 8, 12 different items. You can look at, this is on the front here, you're looking at all of the items. However, you can filter each of these things to say, I only want to look at accessories, and that will filter out other ones that aren't accessories. Food and drink, this will give you 3. Gifts will give us these, and so on and so forth. However, and so the way this works is that whenever you look at something, you'd say in the back end, the server might be querying something along the lines of select all from shop or whatever the table is called, where category equals something. Now I haven't actually inserted a category row column in this. So let's just say, well, everything we've got on this one I've demoed. Yep. And so the way this works is the hint to this lab, we've been told that there are hidden items on here that we want to access. And the way that you can generally assume that one common way you might be able to guess that websites will have unavailable or items that aren't listed is that they might have this column here that says released 1 or 0. So let's say you're a designer clothing brand and you sell hats, shoes, and socks. However, the shirt and belt you've inserted into your database just to make it really easier, quicker to release when you do. However, they have not been released. And so when you query for it, you don't find it. But let's say that you really want that belt that hasn't been released. You know the belt is going to go up in price. You want to get your hands on it quicker, or maybe you just want to see some information about it by getting it to return in your query. And so you can generally assume that the way that this will work, that the query that you'll see will be something along the lines of select all from shop, and the end of the result will say where maybe category equals something, but I don't have a category column, so and all that. So I'll say select all from shop where released equals 1, and there will be a 1 or a 0 depending on whether it's been released or not. And so every single time this runs, it will only return the items if they are released. And so, for example, on here, because it's also got a category, generally you can, the hint that we're given is that in the back end, this is being something along the lines of select all from shop where category equals gifts and released equals 1. And again, this point here is the injection point, and we're assuming that is not sanitizing inputs. And so again, we can get it to return everything using a very similar result to last time, because whatever we put in here counts as control characters. And so we say, I don't know, where category equals gifts, because we know there is a gifts category. And then because we wanted to either return true if they've got gifts, and say, or 1 equals 1, then a comment at the end. Let's try copying this and seeing what happens. Now, if we go here, the injection point in this case is in the URL, because the get parameter in the request being sent to the server is taking this arguments. And so by changing this, we can send what query is being constructed. So if we do this, oops, we got an internal server error. Not sure what happened there. But actually, yeah, as I said earlier, an internal server error when you try to do something weird like this is often a good chance that something's crashed in the back end. And even though it's a malformed request, it means it's a good indicator that there is it's a good indicator that there is input that's not being sanitized. So if we say category equals gifts, or what did I type here? So if your category equals gifts, or 1 equals 1, 1 equals 1. Yep, and so as you can see here, when we do category equals gifts or 1 equals 1, this comment tells us to ignore everything. And so for every single query, for every single row, it's checking. For every single item in the database, it is always going to be true that either the category equals gifts or the number 1 is going to be equal to 1. And so it'll return true for every row, and as such return every single product. And now that we've inserted this, we have dumped the entire database, and you can see that there are a lot more than 12 items on display here. And those are the two main kinds of forms of injections you'll see. And before we wrap up, I'm going to give you a quick demo of a tool that's quite handy to see, quite handy to know. Now, whenever you run something, you can always construct these by hand, and there are a lot of other much more complicated vulnerabilities that you can learn about. But one tool that I seek a lot and that I use a lot during CTFs is a tool known as SQLmap. Now, SQLmap is a tool that you give it where you give it a parameter, and it will automatically try a very large amount of vulnerabilities and try to inject in all kinds of places when you're running it. So the syntax here is, yeah. Now, if you want to download SQLmap, you can just go to the GitHub page, and they've got installation instructions here. You can follow along, and it shouldn't be too difficult. The syntax here is you got a -u, and then you provide the entry point. Now we're using this for Monbank, and so the URL is this page here. And now we need to provide where the data is being given. Now, whenever you submit data to a website, most likely it's going to be either via a GET request or a push request. Now, a GET request is whenever you see the arguments at the end here with a question mark, something equals that. Like, for example, on YouTube, you might see a question mark, V equals, and then an ID. That's because the video ID is being sent to the server via a GET request. And that's what you see here. However, in lots of other cases, in the case of MonBank or other data submission forms, it is generally done via a post request, which means that it is sent via a different way. And we need to cut it, we need to specify the data being sent to say data equals, and then to get the actual names of the forms being submitted, you can use inspect elements. We'll say Nate, it's K. So here, the first form is called email. So email equals email equal, I'll just say tests to say, let's just say that's the piece of data we're submitting. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then on the other hand, there is, the name is password. So, and password equals pass. Now there are a lot of different options you can specify, but I generally like to use the -dump option, and this will just go through and try out and dump as much of the database as it can. And here it gives you a lot of options. Yep, it's asking whether we want to set the cookie that the browser specified. It's redirecting us, asking whether we want to follow it. Say yes. Now, generally speaking, all the default options work. They do, at least in this case. Now, as you can see in this case, it has tried out a bunch of different. Now, in the interest of time, I've already run this, and so it has already discovered what the vulnerability is. If you were to run this for yourself from scratch, this would probably take, I'd say, maybe a minute or two to try and find out what the vulnerability is. But as you can see here, it has already discovered the vulnerability. And here it is already, and here, as you can see, it has dumped as much information as it can. Here is the list of transactions that have been sent. Now, a few of these transfers were tests, and some of them were actually done during the workshop. And here are the 2 emails. And so now that we've actually dumped the database, we don't have to worry about injections because we can just log in as John Smith. And that should work without a hitch. Now, before we wrap up, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the CTF platform that Monash has ourselves. So it's now a CTF platform. Now, CTF stands for Capture the Flag and is a way of earning points for demonstrating hacking related skills. So if you go to ctf.monsec.io, after you log in, you'll be presented with a series of challenges. And this series of challenges we will be working on. I'm in the middle of thinking about revamping them soon. However, these challenges come from Pico CTF. And so at the moment, what we did during the workshop is we went to Pico CTF, and now this is a CTF that is running 24/7. And if you log into it, yep. And so what we're doing here is we were checking a series of simple challenges and often web-based challenges. And generally you get a flag. Generally, whenever you solve these challenges, you get a flag in return. And once you submit that flag to here, you get points. And then when you get points, you can look at the scoreboard and see which users are doing best. And then there are also these crypto challenges that we made that are about, they start out simple, converting hex to ASCII, but I recall last night, this challenge took a significant amount of time for people to figure out. And also, just one final thing before we wrap up, the beginner CTF will be running on the weekend on the 13th of March. If you learn nothing else about MonSec or about CTFs, and if you don't want to participate in anything else ever, come to the beginner CTF is the one thing I urge you to come to. There are a lot of people that are interested. We'll be giving out prizes, and it's generally a lot of fun. It's probably the most fun that I had when I started out in MonSec, and so I encourage you all to come. I believe it costs $5 to register. However, and you can participate in teams, or we can assign you teams if you don't have one, or you can participate solo. It's completely up to you. And we will be giving out prizes. I believe drones are one of the prizes as well. Anyway, I'll wrap up the video here. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on the Facebook or send us an email. Alternatively, you can join the Discord, where a lot of us are quite active, and you can reach out to me personally, ask me some questions. I'm pretty much always available. And I guess I'll talk to you guys later.